Mark, a man struggling to make ends meet, had hit rock bottom, living day to day with just a few dollars to his name. One evening, as he walked home, he saw a homeless woman sitting on the sidewalk, her face weary with life's struggles. Without hesitation, Mark gave her his last $5, even though he had nothing left for himself. He had no idea that this small act of kindness would lead to something completely unexpected. The very next day, a mysterious surprise awaited him at his front door. Something that would change his life forever. Hi everyone, welcome to Mystic Tales. Today I'm excited to share a new story with you. Mark had always been a hard worker, but life has a way of pulling people down, and lately he had felt the weight of the world on his shoulders. He was once hopeful, filled with dreams of a better future, but as bills piled up and job opportunities faded, hope seemed to slip through his fingers like sand. He lived in a small, run-down apartment on the edge of town, barely scraping by, doing odd jobs whenever he could find them. Some days he skipped meals just to save a few dollars. He had grown used to the feeling of emptiness in his stomach, the ache of hunger becoming a familiar companion. It wasn't just the lack of food, it was the growing fear that things would never get better. He had no family nearby, no friends who could lend a hand, and his savings had long been drained. His wallet now only held 5 crumpled dollars, his last bit of money until he could figure out his next move. That evening, as Mark walked home after another unsuccessful day of job hunting, he noticed a woman sitting near the entrance of a small alleyway. She was hunched over, her thin jacket doing little to shield her from the cold night air. Her face was lined with exhaustion, and her hands trembled as she clutched a cardboard sign that simply read, "Anything helps." Mark paused for a moment, his hand instinctively reaching into his pocket where the last $5 rested. He hesitated. That $5 was supposed to be for his dinner, maybe enough for a sandwich or a cheap meal to get him through the night. But as he looked into the woman's eyes, he saw a reflection of his own struggles, a shared sense of defeat and hopelessness. She was just like him, trying to survive one more day. Without a second thought, he pulled out the $5 and gently placed it in her hand. "I hope this helps," he said quietly, offering a small, tired smile. The woman looked up at him, her eyes wide with surprise. She hadn't expected kindness, not from someone who looked as worn down by life as she was. She whispered a soft thank you, her voice barely audible over the noise of the city around them. Mark didn't stay long. He gave her a nod, turned, and continued on his way, feeling a strange mixture of relief and uncertainty. He had nothing left now, but somehow, it felt like the right thing to do. That night, as Mark lay in bed, hunger gnawing at him, he couldn't help but think about the woman he had met. He had given her his last $5. But what about tomorrow? What would he do when he woke up with nothing? These thoughts weighed heavily on his mind, but somehow he felt a sense of peace. Maybe it was because, for once, he had been able to help someone else. The next morning, Mark woke up early, the sunlight creeping through the cracked blinds of his small apartment. He hadn't slept much, his thoughts racing all night. But something felt different today. There was a strange feeling in the air. It was as if the world outside his window had shifted, even though everything looked the same. He got up, rubbing his tired eyes, and went to the door to check the mail. Not that he was expecting anything. The usual bills, maybe a notice or two. But when he opened the door, he froze. There, sitting on his doorstep, was a small box. It was plain brown, with no label, no sign of where it had come from. He knelt down, his heart racing slightly. Who could have left this? He hadn't spoken to anyone in days, except for the woman. He hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do, then picked up the box. It was light, and as he carried it inside, he noticed a small note attached to the top. The handwriting was neat, delicate. Mark's hands trembled as he unfolded the note. It simply read, "Thank you for your kindness. This is for you." His mind raced. Could this be from the woman? But how? He had given her everything he had. There was no way she could afford to send something back. And yet, here it was. He carefully opened the box, his fingers slowly peeling back the tape. Inside was something that nearly made him drop it in shock. Staring back at him was a thick stack of cash. Neatly bundled and tied with a small ribbon, Mark couldn't believe his eyes. He quickly counted the bills. $500. He sat down, his heart pounding in his chest. Who would do this? And why? The note had said thank you, but for what? The $5 he gave the woman? This had to be a mistake. There was no way this was happening. Mark sat there, staring at the money in disbelief. $500. It felt like a dream. For a man who had been scraping by with nothing, this was more than just money. It was a lifeline. His mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. Could this really be connected to the woman he had helped? It didn't seem possible. He had only given her $5, a small act of kindness. And yet, here he was, holding a fortune in his hands. The day went by in a blur. Mark couldn't stop thinking about the box, the money, and the note. He thought about going back to the alleyway, searching for the woman, but he didn't even know her name. And what would he say if he did find her? The questions swirled in his mind, but no answers came. As the sun began to set, Mark decided to do something he hadn't done in a long time. He went to the grocery store. For the first time in weeks, he was able to buy more than just the basics. He picked up fresh bread, a few vegetables, and even a small treat, something he hadn't allowed himself in ages. As he walked through the aisles, the weight of his worries felt lighter than they had in months. When he got home, he placed the groceries on the counter, but his mind drifted back to the mysterious gift. What if it was some kind of mistake? What if someone came looking for it? He kept checking the door, half expecting someone to show up and demand it back. But no one came. Days passed, and Mark began to use the money cautiously. He paid off a few overdue bills, bought some necessities, but he still couldn't shake the feeling that something more was at play. The note had been so simple, but it had changed everything. He knew that whoever had left the money wanted to thank him for something, but why such a generous gift? Each day, Mark found himself thinking more and more about the woman. He wondered if she had found her own luck, or if she was still out there, struggling on the streets. The money had brought him some relief, but the mystery behind it kept nagging at him. Then, one evening, as Mark was getting ready to head out for a walk, he saw something that stopped him in his tracks. There, across the street, sitting on a bench, was the same woman. The one he had given his last $5 to. She looked different now. Cleaner, more put together. But it was definitely her. Mark's heart raced as he crossed the street toward her. Mark approached the woman cautiously. His heart was pounding, unsure of what to say or how to begin. She was sitting on the bench, looking out at the street, unaware of his presence. As he got closer, she turned and their eyes met. For a moment there was silence. Then she smiled softly, recognizing him. "You," Mark said quietly. I've been thinking about you." He hesitated, trying to find the right words. "A few days ago I found something. At my door. A box. With money. And a note." He paused, watching her reaction. The woman nodded slowly, her expression calm. "I know," she said softly. Mark felt a wave of confusion wash over him. "Was it you? Did you leave it?" She smiled again, but this time it was different, as if she knew something he didn't. In a way she said, "That money, it wasn't just from me. It was from someone who saw what you did, someone who wanted to show you that kindness doesn't go unnoticed." Mark blinked, trying to process her words. "But why? I just gave you $5. It wasn't much. I didn't expect anything in return." The woman looked at him, her eyes filled with warmth. Sometimes it's not about the amount, it's about the intention. You didn't have much, but you gave what you could. And that small act, it was seen. By me, and by someone else who could do more. Mark felt his throat tighten. The weight of her words was sinking in. He had given without expecting anything, and yet here he was, receiving something far greater than he ever imagined. Who was it?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. The woman shook her head gently. "That doesn't matter. What matters is that you were willing to help, even when you had nothing. And now, someone wanted to help you in return." Mark sat down on the bench next to her, his mind spinning. He had spent days wondering about the source of the money, But now it felt like the answer didn't matter as much. What mattered was that kindness, in its simplest form, had come back to him in a way he never expected. They sat there in silence for a few minutes, both of them lost in their own thoughts. Mark felt a sense of peace settle over him, a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time. As Mark sat there beside the woman, he felt something shift inside him. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't worried about tomorrow. He realized that what had happened wasn't just about the money. It was about something deeper. It was about the ripple effect of kindness, about how a small gesture could create waves far beyond what he could see. After a few more minutes, the woman stood up, giving Mark one last kind smile. "I don't need anything more from you," she said softly, "but remember, kindness comes back to us, even when we least expect it." Mark nodded, his heart full as he watched her walk away, disappearing into the crowd. He stayed on the bench thinking about her words. He had spent so much time worrying about how to survive, about the next dollar, the next meal. But this moment had changed something in him. It reminded him that the world wasn't as cold as it often seemed. In the weeks that followed, Mark's life began to change. He used the money wisely, paying off his overdue rent, catching up on bills, and even starting to save. But something else happened too. Mark found a new job, one that not only paid better but also gave him a sense of purpose. It wasn't long before his life started to turn around in ways he hadn't thought possible. But the most surprising thing wasn't the money or the job. It was the shift in his heart. He found himself more aware of the people around him, the small struggles that so many others faced. He started doing little things, buying a coffee for someone short on change, leaving a meal for a homeless person. Things that seemed small but now felt powerful. He never saw the woman again, but he thought of her often. She had been a reminder of something simple and profound. That kindness, no matter how small, could change the course of a life. One evening, as Mark sat in his now cozy apartment, he reflected on the journey he had been through. From the moment he gave away his last $5 to the day he found that mysterious box at his door, everything had been a lesson in compassion. And in the end, it wasn't the money that changed his life. It was the kindness that had come full circle. Loved this story? Tap that like button and subscribe to Mystic Tales for more. Let us know how this story made you feel with a single word.